Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Joining us once again today is Phil Bourjaily, Ducks Unlimited magazine shotgunning columnist. Phil, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's been a while since we've had you on. I don't think we've even had you on in this season, which is really surprising because your shows are always really popular. Before we get rolling along here, I just want to kind of touch base with you on how your waterfowl season was for the 2021-2022 year.
It was terrible. I don't think I speak for a lot of people when I say it was terrible. We had a drought here in Iowa, which did not help. Although the ponds that I hunt filled up during the season, it didn't seem to make much difference. And then what was really strange was our goose migration was way late. And when they did get here, we only had about 10 days of the season left. They never went anywhere where I could get at them. They never had a chance to. They weren't here long enough to feed out the safe fields and get out where I can hunt them.
Yeah.
So I hunted pheasants a lot this year. Is the short answer to how my duck season was.
Not a bad trade-off.
I love waterfowling, but I grew up as a bird hunter and love it. And I did get to go on a terrific teal hunt early in September. I had never been to Texas to teal hunt before, and it was everything people tell me it is, and then some.
Nice. Who'd you go down there with?
We went. This is we did actually a gun test, Field Stream, but we went to a place called Pintail Hunt Club.
Okay.
Near Eagle Lake, so it wasn't on the coast. Which initially I was disappointed because I was hoping we could catch redfish in the afternoon, but we had enough work to do that we were busy all the time anyway. But the numbers of birds were just phenomenal. We got out the first morning into a little we just stood at the edge of some brush, and you could hear the teal getting up, and it really sounded like crashing surf every time a flock would get up.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then the sky was full, and actually it was perfect because then after the sky was full and you got to watch that for a while, then when shooting time came, it was 2s and 3s in small groups, and just wonderful. I think each day there was, between 5 or 6 of us shooting every day, and I think it took 40 minutes was probably the longest we were ever out.
Had some shooters with you.
We did. We also had a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
It was just nonstop. I would hear the other groups in other places still banging away as we were leaving and thinking, geez, maybe being able to hit what I shoot at isn't all it's cracked up to be. I'd like to still be hunting. But
yeah.
But no, it was really, really fun.
Yeah. Did you have what exactly were you shooting? Like, did you have a preferred teal load or anything?
I think we were shooting steel 4s, and we were shooting some heavy hammer, which is not really necessary for 25-yard teal.
Yeah.
And we had a terrific dog at the lodge there, Biggie. And we lost very few ducks.
Yeah.
We got him in tight, and with teal, it doesn't take a whole lot to kill one.
Yeah. People really struggle with blue wings and they assume that they're going faster than what they are. But I think it's just that they're acrobatic little targets. And I think the biggest problem, you mentioned it, you said they started coming in 2s and 3s. The big problem that people have with blue wings is you'll have 30 of them come in.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
Yes, you will. And it is. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But it's still a problem. And no, really, when they decoy, they're not that hard. And when you know they're coming. The other thing about teal, people think teal are fast. They're actually slower than big ducks. But they have surprise on their side so often.
Yeah.
You think they're fast because all of a sudden there they are. And that's what gets people scrambling and makes people think they're going 100 miles an hour. They really aren't. And they are always closer than you think. It's easy to overlead a teal. Yeah, and they are. They do some twisting and turning that makes it tough. But if you look at their beak and trust your eyes and hands, you can hit them okay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of right now, the end of waterfowl season here in Arkansas, it really a lot of that for us becomes green wing shoots, which I am absolutely a huge fan of. And I think a lot of people struggle there because you're sitting in a blind or a pit or wherever, you're not set up for teal like when you mentioned for blue wing. On your blue wing hunt, you're hunting with 4s. Well, a lot of guys that are in fields and pit blinds and whatnot, they're sitting there with BBs or 2s or and so it really lessens your opportunity for to get on target. Now, granted, you still typically do, but it can definitely impact you just on the shell you're shooting on a good teal hunt.
I've shot a lot of green wings with 2s because where we are, like as with you, they're a late duck for us, and so our good green wing shoots are usually mid-November and later, and they're just like blue wings, only smaller, but they have surprise on their side, and that you see them all just fluttering down over the decoys. I remember I still have the the spinner wing I shot. First time I tried hunting in a ghillie suit was I hit a green wing flight day, and I remember and it was also a day my gun decided not to work, so it was pretty much a single shot almost sometimes. And I just remember seeing all of a sudden there was 30 blue wings around my spinner like moths around a candle, and I shot the spinner.
You shot the spinner.
And then they all went right over my head, and my gun didn't work. So
that's a hell of a day.
It was like that all. It was if it wasn't teal, it was gabballs that day. I was covered up, and I think I shot 2. Yeah, no, it is. Having the right choke and the right load. Green wings, especially, they are so small. They look out of range when they're really not very far away.
Yeah,
and that confuses people too. It means I usually wind up letting some go, but then it means that the ones you do shoot at are close.
Yeah.
So yes, your pattern is tight. You can shoot right at them. But with teal, especially because they're not flying straight always, looking at the bird and trusting your eye-hand coordination and not trying to aim the shot really helps.
Yeah, a lot of times, I'd kind of consider that almost like an instinctual shot. It's really fast, and that kind of leads us into the topics that I wanted to get you on here to talk about today. And one is hands-on shooting, and so really you kind of took a little bit of a deep dive on what to do with your hands. Where should your hands be? And then also, which also has a lot to do with your hands. The other topic is the high overhead shot, and you had a really good breakdown in the magazine, one of the past issues here, and I think it's really important. We'll start out with the hands-on shooting because it's kind of I guess the running joke. I can't remember what movie it was. It was Talladega Nights, where he didn't know what to do with his hands. And I think sometimes shotgunners have an issue with missing, but it all can just be solved by instinctually having your hands in the right position. So kind of explain how you started off with this column and what your focus was on, really what the information you're trying to relay here.
I went to the Remington Shooting School years ago when they were still operating, and one of the things the instructor told me that I always remember is he said, your eyes will never lie to your hands. That is, if you trust your eyes and hands to do the job, they're going to do it a lot better than you will if you try to think your way through the shot or try to aim the shot. And we all know that from, if you've ever played any ball sports at all, you know that. But we pick up a gun and we think somehow it's different because it's got a barrel and a bead and everything that we think we need to aim. But if you can trust your eyes and hands, you can do some miraculous stuff with a shotgun. And that starts with how you hold the gun and how you move the gun. And the first thing is, when you hold a shotgun, you don't want to squeeze it. I've heard various analogies. I always try to think of it, I think of it, if it were full of helium, I want to hold it just tight enough so it doesn't float away. If it were a balloon, I've heard someone say you want to hold it as if you're holding a tube of toothpaste and not squeeze any of the toothpaste out. But if your hands are relaxed, they're going to work. They're going to flow to the target better, and so that's important. I like to keep the forend, low in the palm of cupped in my hand. Some people, I see people holding it all different ways, and I usually will extend a finger along the forend just to help me think about pointing. That finger is the gun's just there because if I could load my finger, if you could shoot a shell out of your finger, we would never miss.
You never miss, yeah.
Never.
I've never missed with my finger.
No, and you won't, because we have this ability to point that, and that's what you have to take advantage of when you shoot a shotgun. So as the idea that the shotgun is an extension of your, there's really people say your body, but really it's an extension of your hand is what it is, or extension of your finger. That's how you want to think of it. And the front hand, you can, where you hold the gun is personal preference. I like it fairly, if the farther back you hold it, closer to the receiver you hold it, the faster it will be. And I just from target shooting, that's what I'm used to. But then when you mount the gun, and I think this is really important. The front hand really leads the way and makes the first move.
Yeah.
It goes out and toward the target before the gun comes up, or as the gun is starting to come up. So if you think about that, your both hands are working together. The back hand, the trigger hand, its job is to lift the gun up to your cheek. As the front hand is really the one that points the gun, and so it is going out to the bird. That also helps clear your coat, which you get bundled up late in the season. You want to make sure you're not snagging on the armpit of your jacket when you bring the gun up. But if you start by pushing out and toward the bird's beak, you'll clear the coat and you'll have the gun moving in the right direction, so that all you need to do then with the backhand is raise it up, to your face first and then into your shoulder and pull the trigger.
And do all of that without thinking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All your thinking is done before you ever take a shot.
Yeah. No, I think that's where people run into problems is they start thinking, especially younger hunters who, start thinking about, recoil or something like that. Or I can't say younger hunters, maybe inexperienced hunters. They're thinking about that shot, even while they're trying to make it. And that's
right.
That's where their hands get all, wonky and not necessarily out first. Push that backhand where you're getting the stock into your shoulder, and just doing it without thinking.
Right. And something else, I noticed this during that Texas teal hunt a couple times, and dove hunting too around that same time, because I started off the season really, really well. I kind of degraded as it went on, but there were shots where I was looking at the bird and had the gun up, and I thought, I'm not on this target, but I'm just going to pull the trigger anyway and see what happens. And I centered the bird.
Mm-hmm.
If your eyes and hands will make, if you let them, they will make last minute corrections you don't even know about. You're not even aware of. It's just like, when you shoot a pistol, you look at the front sight, and that if you keep focused on the front sight, you're subconsciously take the gun to the bullseye. Same thing. If you look at the target with a shotgun, if you're really looking at it, you will make a correction that you're not even aware of. I remember the first time I ever learned that was shooting trap in a high wind when the targets were bouncing up and down the way they do. And I remember hitting birds that I really didn't think I was on.
Mm-hmm.
It was just because I was looking at the target really hard. And that's, so hands are half of. Hands are important, but hands just their job is to take orders from the eyes.
Yeah.
And to get the gun into action smoothly, which is a question to say of push it out toward the target. And one of the most, people are always concerned about moving the gun fast. That is, all that does is increase the chances that you won't make a good gun mount, and it kind of loses your connection with the target. Your goal really should always be to move the gun in time with the bird. And that's along with the soft hands, you want, fairly slow hands.
Yeah. In the column, you kind of have a phrase that slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I mean, that's a great,
you hear that a lot with people talking about shooting anything, but absolutely true. If you are smooth, that's fast enough. You don't have to move the gun very far. You watch people who can really shoot, they don't move a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so you're going to win the race with a duck every time if you've got a shell that's moving 1,400 feet per second and it's flying 30 miles an hour. You don't have very far to move. It's not a question of being super fast. Sometimes it gets that way when you're in a blind with a bunch of people and you want to make sure you shoot whatever bird before somebody else shoots it. Otherwise, if you can shoot with your own timing, you'll hit a lot more of what you're shooting at.
What about in regards to the trigger? You kind of touch on that. And I think, I don't know. I guess I haven't really read a ton just focusing on the trigger pull of a shotgun. I think it's always just assumed, but I can't say that I have this problem, but for maybe someone who's not as experienced as a shooter, what what would you tell them about the trigger?
I'm the last person you want to ask about that. I'm a clod when it comes to trigger. I don't feel trigger pulls. I'm not aware of trigger pulls.
I guess that's how I am too. That's why
And
it's always surprising.
I've talked to a lot of good shooters, sporting clays shooters who are very particular about their triggers, and a few that aren't. But here's how I am with triggers. I went to Gunsight Academy years ago. Field and Stream sent me there to learn how to shoot a rifle. And they gave me a rifle, and I was shooting it. And the instructor watched me for a minute, and he said, "Boy, you pull the trigger with all 5 fingers, don't you?" And yeah, I do. Some people don't. Some people are very aware of when that trigger breaks, and that's probably better. But I'm not. For me, it's just I want to shoot the bird as soon as I'm on it.
Yeah, I've got actually a really funny that just dawned on me, and I got a really funny story, and I'm not going to mention any names here. But on a waterfowl hunt just, a week ago, I was hunting with some guys from the industry, and a couple of them had never, and I didn't know these people necessarily, but they'd never been on a waterfowl hunt before. So when they showed up, they were invited, and they were supposed to bring their own guns and stuff. And this guy, the first day, he hunted with a gun, and it didn't work. And he had never duck hunted before, so he was super bummed out. And so we got back to the lodge, and he goes to his truck, and he gets out. He's like, "I brought 2 guns. It's no big deal." And he goes back, and he pulls out a bolt action 12 gauge, and it had an AccuChoke on it. And we're like, you're going to hunt with that thing? And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that afternoon, after we had lunch, and the guys at the lodge are like, "Hey, let's go shoot some clays," and they had a couple really nice throwers that they even did the wobble, and they were moving, and it was really cool. And so we stood out there in this field, and this guy who he's not a shotgun guy. I mean, he's a rifle guy, and he stood out there, and he whooped our tails with this bolt action.
Really?
I mean, I think it only had like a 24-inch barrel on it. And he, we were doing the what some people call it Annie Oakley or knockout or anything like that. And this guy totally, he probably won 2 out of the 4 or 5 competitions that we had. And he was up against, 6 or 7, 8 guys who are some shooters. The guides were shooting, the lodge owner was shooting. It was pretty impressive. Have you ever seen anyone, shoot a bolt action shotgun like that?
A friend of mine has one of the Marlin Goose guns with the 36-inch barrel, which is like...
it's like the Paris gun.
It is like the Paris gun. And he shoots it pretty well. He shoots everything pretty well. You will find people, rifle guys, you're talking about Annie Oakleys. Yeah, they have a chance to aim at that going away target. They can break it a long way away. I enjoy trap shooting. I think it's really good practice for upland hunting, but you can do a lot of things wrong in trap shooting that are not going to translate into your duck hunting.
Absolutely.
And have some success. And part of that is aiming the gun, which is fine for a going away target, especially going away target when you've got a lot of time like that. In an Oakley where you're letting other people shoot and you got a long time to draw a bead. But if you try that in the duck blind, it's not going to work for you.
You'll be in trouble. Well,
and so when you practice, when you shoot trap, when you shoot any practice game, you have to practice it in a way that's going to carry over to your field shooting. Which, again, to me means trusting your eyes and hands and not trying to ride the target forever as he was able to do with that bolt gun.
Absolutely. Well, the funniest part about that is we got up the next morning and went out to a rice field and got in the pit, and I didn't even look over. I wasn't paying attention. And look over, and he's got that bolt gun in the pit. And we had a couple flocks of teal come in, a bunch of teal buzzing around, and we all stood up and shot. And I turned around and looked at him. I was like, "Did you get 2 shots off there?" And he's like, "Yeah." So he was getting 2 shots off with a bolt action.
That's pretty good.
I was really impressed. I've got some pictures. I'll see if I can send you a picture of it.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, he was hammering away on it. It was a very, very impressive. And I guess that all just, as you were talking about what you're doing with your hands and what you're doing, like when this guy's doing everything the exact opposite of what you were probably talking about, where, because his hands are moving the whole time. It's a pretty impressive feat for shotgunning. I tip my hat to him. I think everyone was pretty impressed with it.
Yeah, I would have been.
Let's move on here. Sorry, I kind of got you sidetracked there with the old bolt action story. But, one of the things with your hands, too, that you talk about in this column is keeping your hands warm. Why is this so important?
Warm hands?
Other than just keeping your hands warm, yeah.
And I maybe place too much emphasis on this because my hands get numb. I've always had bad circulation, and it doesn't get any better as I get older. And it's really unfortunate that I like to hunt Canada geese when it's 0 as much as I do, because
yeah,
it's really not easy for me. But you can't feel anything. I can't even, sometimes I can't even stick a shell up a magazine tube if my thumbs get so weak in the cold. So what I have found for keeping my hands warm are electric mittens.
Yeah.
And they are wonderful.
Yeah.
I know there's electric hand muffs, and I've got a set of those. And there's those hand warmers, which work really well, but until they get wet, the chemical ones, and they're way better than nothing. But in waterfowling, they have their limitations. But the electric mittens, which I take with me when in my layout blind, get really, really hot. And so I can keep those on, keep my hands warm. And then if I need to wave a flag or blow a call or shoot a gun, they come off right away. And then they go back on. Your hands can get wet with mittens and you can still put them back on, unlike gloves.
Yeah.
So for me, I won't hunt in cold weather without those anymore. I really, really like them. But as for me, warm hands is just, I have a hard time working the gun with cold hands.
Yeah, I think most people probably do, and I'm guilty of not really liking gloves at all.
I don't like gloves either. I need gloves desperately, but I don't like them. So the mittens are great because I just don't wear anything under them. I just pull them off, and I've got bare hands for shooting, and certainly it makes a difference. I'm not much of a caller, but I can tell the difference totally with calling. Calling with gloves on and calling with bare hands is a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just muffles the sound and wrecks it if you've got gloves on. So bare hands are the way to go if you can do it. And so for me, electric mittens that's been my salvation. I don't know. I haven't tried them duck hunting. Duck hunting is not that cold usually for me, and I can, unless my hands get wet.
Get wet, yeah.
But it's the late season goose hunts where I need help.
Yeah, that's working smarter, not harder, with the electric mittens.
Yes, it is.
I've had about 1 million different pair of gloves, and I do wear gloves. I can't say that I don't wear them. I wear them. I used to not when I was younger, and I felt like I could just out there moving chunks of ice and picking up decoys and doing that. And now as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten a little weaker, and now I'm a pretty big fan of the hot hands.
The hot hands are good.
I keep those around. That's an important part.
And the Texas rigs are good too. There's nothing that cuts way down on the amount of water you get on your hands when you're picking up and moving decoys.
Absolutely.
Just be able to run your finger into that loop. I can do that barehanded and not feel it. Which is great.
That does make it a lot easier. Well, let's discuss, and we kind of talked about this before we hit the record button here.
Mm-hmm.
You did the column on the high overhead shot, and this is, for me, probably one of my, I don't like shooting them too high, but an overhead shot for me is definitely a solid kill shot. I'm very confident with it. Some of the guys that I hunt with are very confident with it. So when we have something cruise over the top, of our blind, we're going to take that shot because we're all very confident with it. We all shoot it pretty well. You mentioned you're not as big of a fan of that. This is all, obviously personal preference, but you kind of got into the technique and the practice of shooting this shot, and you had 5 different points to talk about. But before we get into the 5 points, talk about why you really don't really like this shot.
It's not that I don't. It is a great shot. It's a killing shot. Absolutely, everything's exposed, and it is. It's a shot that you can kill them fairly far up there overhead because they say they're showing a lot of vitals. I don't like it just because every bird I shoot over the top is a bird I'm not shooting the decoys, and I hate that I'm turning into one of those guys, but I get so much more pleasure out of watching birds cup up into the decoys than pass overhead. That I'd rather wait for that. And the other thing for me is I hunt without a retriever, which is I've always had bird dogs, and that may change someday. But So I want my birds in front of me, and I want them to fall in the water where I can shoot them again if I have to. And so, that's another reason I don't like to take the overhead shot.
Yeah.
When I do, I get in trouble.
Yeah,
But
and it can.
It's a good shot. It's a good shot to practice. It's funny. I had a call from a DU reader. He's asking me about guns, and he said, and he hunted he's from Illinois, but he and his friends all take 2 guns to the blind. They take a regular gun for shooting ducks and the decoys, and then they all take 10 gauges or 3.5-inch 12s choked really tight for the overhead shot, so that they're ready for anything.
The skyscrapers there.
Yeah,
jeez.
But it's we were talking about hands, and talking about moving your hands slowly. There is never a time when moving slowly is more important than shooting the overhead shot. Most people want to do the exact opposite, and that's how I used to try to do it. Is you figure it's going to take 1 million feet of lead, and so you swing way past the bird real fast and shoot, and who knows where those pellets go.
Yeah.
But if you come through the bird about half the speed you think you have to, it really doesn't take a whole lot. And see a little bit of daylight. Well, you block it out. If it's coming directly overhead, you're blocking it out. So you block it out. You figure you're past the beak. You pull the trigger. That's how I do it.
Yeah, and that's just a pretty smooth swing right there. I mean,
it is. It is about the only time I try to swing through a bird. Is I usually just put the gun in front of a bird that I want to shoot. But if I'm shooting an overhead shot, I will come from behind it, move through it, and past the beak. And pull the trigger.
Yeah. And in the column, you kind of talk about footwork too, which is interesting because a lot of times, shotgunners, you're not really thinking about footwork in the duck blind, but it can really be an important aspect.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of times in waterfowling, you don't have the luxury of using your feet. You're stuck in the mud or you're sitting down or whatever. But if a bird is coming, if you're right-handed, and you've got a bird straight overhead or going to your right side, if you keep your weight on your back foot, your front leg straight, you try that. If you can try that on your own, even without a gun in your hands, you find it's a much easier move. Whereas if the bird comes to the left side, you're right-handed, you keep your weight on the front foot, it's a lot easier to pivot around on that front foot and make that shot. So it's and that helps you keep the gun on the line of the target, and that is the other really important thing especially when the ranges get longer. Is the lead is not as important. You've got a wide pattern to hit the bird with, but the line of the target is really important. If you're not on the line, you're not going to hit it.
Yeah, and all of that has to do with like the hands and the feet and all kind of working together, similar to what we talked about, in the hands-on shooting column. It's
but
all
the footwork helps you not. Helps you keep the gun moving straight.
Yeah.
If you got your weight right, and because as soon as you start to dip the muzzle, then you're pulling the gun offline.
And you mentioned speed a little bit in here. You talk about gun speed, and you've already talked about it briefly, but it's very, very small movements here with this overhead shot. I mean, it
is. It is small movements, and you remember too that when as ranges increase, it doesn't take very much movement at the muzzle to translate into a lot of distance at the bird. I find that shooting, I don't do a lot of trap shooting anymore, but shooting handicap trap, the farther you move back, the smaller the movements are. And it's the same thing when you're shooting long range birds.
Yeah.
It's not and again, it's the exact, what you think you need to do is the exact opposite of what you should do. You think you need to swing the gun fast and a lot to get in front of that bird because it's so high up, and that is not the way to do it. And back when I liked shooting things, and I used to like it on trips to Canada is where I've done most of my long range shooting because the fields are so big up there. A lot of it's field hunting, and the fields are huge. And if you sail a bird, you'll get it.
Yep.
You just have to watch it.
Yeah.
Sometimes a long way, and then it falls, and you go get it. And then I have done some, taken some really long 60, 70-yard shots and killed. And the higher the birds are, the slower you need to move the gun.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think, there's not really I guess experienced shooters have probably taken, like you said, you've taken the shot a lot, but it's hard to practice this because this shot is not replicated in, trap or skeet necessarily, but in sporting clays, some courses do have that. So
they do, and you absolutely should. It's not a hard shot once you get used to the fact that you can't see the bird when you pull the trigger because the guns come through it. It's a pretty easy shot. I learned it actually. I was just lucky the first time I went to South America. We shot pigeons in the field, and I'd always had to struggle with that overhead shot, and I just wound up in a spot in the field where the pigeons were coming in right over where I was hiding. And so I got to shoot that overhead shot a lot of times in one day.
Yeah.
And from then on, it was my favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, it was that took one day and I had it. And so it doesn't take a ton of practice, but you do need to get used to the idea of not trying to move the gun fast, of moving through the target. And usually it doesn't take a whole lot of lead.
Yeah. And it's funny, Nash Buckingham, so the kind of famous outdoor author, from the early part of the 20th century, one of his favorite shots was that overhead, and he hunted a lot of timber. He hunted a lot of like cypress sloughs, like cypress breaks, and that was his favorite shot. Was a kind of a straight up as that duck was circling overhead, and it'd come over the top of him over the trees.
Yeah,
and he would
Nash
take
was a tree topper.
Yeah, that's right.
He liked that a lot more than he liked shooting on the decoys. But yeah, that is, and that's what he had that big gun made for.
Yeah, that's what he had Bo Whoop for, was that high top, that tree topper shot. Now, you do that in Arkansas, people criticize you pretty heavily, but I think that's a personal preference. But
it is. The only 2 ducks I ever shot at Biomeda were tree topped because our hole was iced up and they didn't want to come in. So, but so sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes if you want to kill ducks, you have to shoot that overhead shot. And there is, let's say, as long as you know where the bird is going to fall, it's a good shot. It's an ethical, responsible shot to take because you've got everything to hit there. Head, neck, vitals, it's all right there. So it's absolutely one that everybody should have in their repertoire for for days when the birds don't want to work. Or and some people like shooting stuff far away. Some people enjoy that shot. I used to like it a lot, and I just what I want out of a waterfowl hunt now is less about the shooting and more about the hunting. Yeah. So
that makes perfect sense. Why you don't like that shot necessarily then.
Right.
Well, cool, Phil. This has been great. Just kind of talking about the hands-on shooting column and the high overhead shot. I think we've really taken a little bit deeper dive than what you even did, in those columns. And I think, our listeners can really pick up some of these very small things, whether doing with their hands or even their feet, like we talked about, and some different ways to practice these shots. I think it's been very, very beneficial.
Good. Well, I hope so. Well, the timing of this is pretty good because seasons are closed here and closing everywhere else. But now it is time to start, not quite yet, but pretty soon it's time to start practicing for next year. And that's, as a shotgun columnist, you like to think that people don't just read what you write, but they actually go out and work on it. Yeah. And I would encourage her. And honestly, I don't understand why people don't shoot, because it's fun.
Absolutely.
And it's spend all this time thinking about waterfowl season and doing all the things that we do, but it's really a lot more fun when you can hit what you shoot at. And it's not like practicing your shooting is like hard work and no fun. It's so anyway, that's my New Year's resolution for everybody who's listening is get out to the gun club more this summer.
And practice. Hunting season may be ending, but shotgunning season is pretty much just beginning, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Phil, thanks a lot for coming on the show today. It's been great, and we'll have to get you back on soon.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's always fun.
I'd like to thank my guest, Phil Bourjaily, Ducks Unlimited magazine shotgunning columnist, for coming on and sharing some of his insight on hands-on shooting and the high overhead shot. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, Stay tuned to the ducks.